What would you do if your parents chose a concert over helping you through a life-threatening surgery? Sarah sat in a hospital room, clutching her phone as her mother yelled at her, more concerned about missing Elton John than about her emergency surgery. Her parents had always seen her as an afterthought, even when she supported them financially for years. This time, Sarah made a choice. Stay tuned to see how she finally takes control of her life, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Elton John tickets for months, my mother yelled, her voice cutting through the quiet hospital room, echoing off the sterile walls. I sat there stunned, gripping my phone with trembling hands. It was Christmas Eve at Las Vegas Medical Center, just me, my 2-year-old twins, Cody and Lily, quietly playing in the corner, and a nurse named Brittany checking my vitals. The pain in my abdomen was excruciating, like a knife twisting inside me, but the look of indifference on my mother's face through the video call hurt even more. My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm 33 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my own family. My younger sister, Ashley the golden child, could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I couldn't even get them to watch their only grandchildren while I underwent emergency surgery for complications related to my husband's death 6 months ago. The doctors had found internal bleeding that needed immediate attention, but all my parents cared about were their concert tickets and celebrating Christmas Eve with Ashley. When I finally asked for their help after exhausting all other options, my dad's response cut deeper than any surgical tool could. "You're becoming a real nuisance and burden, Sarah. We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." I had been supporting my parents financially since they took early retirement 3 years ago. Every month, without fail, I sent them $2,500 to help with their mortgage and expenses. Even after David died, I continued to do it, out of love and duty, believing that families should support each other. How foolish I had been. As tears silently soaked the hospital blanket, Brittany gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "My friend Tiffany is a professional nanny who specializes in childhood trauma. Let me call her for you," she offered, her kindness a stark contrast to the coldness of my parents. The twins were still too young to understand what was happening. They'd already lost their father to a car accident, and now they might lose me too, if the surgery went wrong. The thought terrified me, but not nearly as much as leaving them with people who saw them as burdens rather than treasures. In that moment, with pain ripping through my body and disappointment crushing my heart, I made my decision. "Yes, please call her," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. With those words, I began cutting the poisonous ties to the people who had raised me but never truly loved me. As I hung up the phone, a wave of memories flooded over me. My childhood had been a long series of moments where I was overlooked, while Ashley received all the attention. When I graduated college with honors, my parents barely acknowledged it because Ashley had been cast in a local commercial that same weekend. When I married David, they complained about the wedding venue being too far from their home. Even when the twins were born, they visited only once, claiming the babies were too fussy for their liking. David had been my rock through it all. He understood the sting of family disappointment, having been estranged from his own father for years. "We'll build our own family," he would say, "one that knows how to love." And we did, creating a home filled with laughter, warmth, and acceptance. But 6 months ago, a drunk driver stole him away, leaving me to raise our children alone while battling depression and grief. Despite my own loss, I continued supporting my parents. I even increased the monthly amount when they mentioned struggling with inflation. I wanted to be better than them, to prove that families should stand by each other no matter what. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, bleeding internally, possibly dying, and they couldn't miss a single concert to care for my children. Brittany returned with news that her friend Tiffany would arrive within the hour. "She's amazing with kids," Brittany assured me. She used to work with trauma victims at the Children's Hospital before becoming a private nanny. "How much will this cost?" I asked, worry creeping into my voice. Medical bills were already piling up since David's insurance coverage had limitations. "Don't worry about that now," Brittany said. Let's focus on getting you ready for surgery. But I was worried. I thought about the $2,500 I was scheduled to transfer to my parents next week, money that could now help pay for childcare instead. The thought sparked something inside me, a flame of self-preservation that had been extinguished years ago. When Tiffany arrived, she was everything Brittany had promised: kind, professional, and immediately connecting with the twins. As hospital staff prepared me for surgery, I made a decision. "Could you bring me my phone one more time?" I asked Brittany. With shaking hands, I sent 2 messages. The first was to my bank, canceling all future automatic transfers to my parents' account. The second was to my parents. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Don't contact me again." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I felt something unexpected through the pain and fear: freedom. The surgery was successful, but left me weaker than anticipated. I spent 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, grateful for Tiffany, who had gone above and beyond by staying with the twins in my hospital room during the days and taking them to my apartment at night. During one of my more lucid moments, I noticed my phone blinking with notifications, 27 missed calls and numerous text messages from my parents and Ashley. Most of the messages followed a predictable pattern: confusion, then anger, then desperate pleas about their mortgage payment. Not once did they ask how my surgery went or if the twins were okay. The final message from my father was particularly telling. "You can't just cut us off like this. We've planned a cruise next month and the tickets are non-refundable." My sister's messages felt different. She seemed genuinely confused. "Mom and Dad just told me you were having some minor procedure. What's going on? Why are they freaking out about money?" It hit me. My parents had lied to Ashley about the seriousness of my situation, making it seem trivial to justify their choice of a concert over taking care of their own grandchildren. I decided to tell her the truth, even though I was still groggy from medication. I sent her the full story, explaining everything. Her response came quickly. "Oh my God, Sarah, I had no idea it was an emergency surgery. They told me you were just being dramatic about a routine checkup. I would have watched the twins if I'd known. I'm so sorry I believed her." Ashley wasn't cruel. She had simply grown up in an environment where her needs always came first. Maybe, just maybe, this revelation would help her see our parents for who they really were. By the time I was discharged, I had made some important decisions. First, I hired Tiffany part-time to help with the twins during my recovery. Second, I contacted a lawyer to draft a will, designating a trusted friend as the twins' guardian should anything happen to me, certainly not my parents. Third, I blocked my parents' numbers, allowing only Ashley limited contact while I assessed her sincerity. The financial impact of my decisions was huge. The $2,500 I'd been sending my parents each month had represented nearly a third of my income as a graphic designer. Without that burden, I could finally afford proper childcare and maybe even start rebuilding the emergency fund that had been drained after David's death. That night, as I lay in my own bed, the twins sleeping across the hall, I felt a mix of emotions. There was guilt, the deep-rooted feeling that I was somehow wrong for putting myself and my children first. There was fear about managing recovery while caring for 2 toddlers. But there was also something new, something unfamiliar. A quiet sense of self-respect was taking root. Then, my phone pinged. It was a text from Ashley. "I just had a huge fight with Mom and Dad about how they treated you. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" Maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. No. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was slowly regaining my strength. The incision site still throbbed with pain whenever I moved too quickly, but I was managing better each day. Tiffany had been a godsend, arriving every morning to help with the twins while I worked from home. My graphic design clients had been surprisingly understanding about my limited availability, and I was grateful for the flexibility of remote work that allowed me to stay close to my children. Ashley had visited twice, bringing healthy meals and spending time with the twins. At first, our conversations were cautious, tentative, but slowly she began to open up. She told me about her own experiences with our parents, the pressures, the expectations, and how she had always been caught between her loyalty to them and her own sense of right and wrong. "They always made it seem like you were choosing to distance yourself from the family," she admitted one evening as we watched the twins play. "I never realized they were pushing you away." I was beginning to see a new side to my sister, one that had been hidden beneath years of our parents' manipulation. While I wasn't ready to completely trust her yet, I appreciated her efforts. Then came the knock at the door. I had been half expecting it. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway. My mother was clutching her designer purse nervously, while my father stood with his arms crossed, familiar impatience etched on his face. I hesitated, heart pounding, before opening the door just enough to speak through the gap. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Sarah, darling, we've been so worried," my mother began, her sugary tone immediately raising my defenses. "You haven't been answering our calls, and we needed to make sure you and the twins were all right." "We're fine," I replied flatly. "Now, if that's all—" "It's not all," my father interrupted, pushing slightly against the door. "We need to discuss this ridiculous financial situation. The bank called about our mortgage payment, and we had to dip into our cruise savings to cover it." The audacity was breathtaking. No questions about my recovery, no concern for their grandchildren, just demands about money. "I told you I'm cutting financial ties," I said. "I meant it." "But sweetie," my mother pleaded, her voice rising an octave, "we've come to depend on that money. Your father and I adjusted our lifestyle based on your commitment to help us." "My commitment?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've been sending money out of guilt and obligation while you couldn't even watch your grandchildren during my emergency surgery." My father's face darkened. "That's not fair, Sarah. We had plans." "Plans more important than my children's safety? More important than my life?" I replied, anger rising. "Do you know what the doctor said? There was a chance I might not survive that surgery." "Did you even bother to ask?" Their silence was answer enough. "We made one mistake," my mother whispered dramatically. "Are you really going to punish us like this?" "This isn't punishment, Mom. This is consequence," I said, feeling a strange calm overtake me. "I've spent my entire life seeking your approval and support, and in my moment of greatest need, you chose Elton John tickets over helping me." "We're your parents," my father interjected, his tone shifting to demand respect. "And I'm a parent too," I countered. "I would never treat Cody and Lily the way you've treated me. Never." Just then, Lily toddled into view, clutching her stuffed giraffe. My mother instantly switched tactics. "There's my precious grandbaby," she cooed, bending down. "Grandma brought presents." Lily, unfamiliar with these relative strangers, backed away and looked at me with uncertainty in her eyes. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "When I'm ready to talk, if I'm ever ready, I'll reach out." "But the money," my father started. "Is no longer your concern," I finished, gently closing the door. The next morning, my parents returned with reinforcements, my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who had always positioned herself as the family peacemaker. "Sarah, honey, let's be reasonable," Aunt Susan pleaded from outside my door, which I had not opened. "Your parents are struggling without your help." "They managed their finances for decades before I started helping them," I replied through the door. "They chose early retirement knowing their savings weren't adequate." My mother's voice broke in. "We made those decisions because you promised to help us. We've had to cancel our cruise and now we might lose the house." Their attempts at manipulation were so transparent now, it was almost laughable. After years of being wrapped in their web of guilt, I had finally stepped back and saw things for what they really were. When had I ever promised a lifetime of support? I had only offered temporary help after their retirement, but somehow that had morphed into an expectation that I would always be there permanently. "Mom, Dad, I'm recovering from major surgery and caring for 2 toddlers. This conversation is over," I said firmly, turning on my heel and walking away from the door, ignoring their relentless knocking and pleading. Later that day, I received a group email from my father, addressed to the entire extended family, claiming that I had abandoned them when they needed me most after they'd sacrificed everything for me. The email conveniently left out the part where they refused to help with the twins during my emergency surgery, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who suddenly cut them off without warning. What they didn't expect was the backlash. My cousin David, who lived near my parents, replied to the group, "Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last month? And Aunt Jennifer, wasn't that a new diamond tennis bracelet you were showing off at Thanksgiving?" Other family members began chiming in, many messaging me privately to ask for the full story. Even Aunt Susan called me directly after hearing the truth. "I had no idea about your surgery," she admitted. "They told me you were just being dramatic about some routine procedure and using it to punish them financially." Ashley, on the other hand, had fully taken my side after witnessing our parents' behavior firsthand. She helped me craft a simple, factual response to the family email thread. "I recently underwent emergency surgery with significant risk of complications. My parents refused to watch my children during this time because they had concert tickets. I am now focusing on my recovery and caring for my twins without additional stress." The support that followed was overwhelming. David's wife dropped off home-cooked meals, a second cousin I barely knew offered to babysit for free, and Ashley started spending weekends at my apartment, bonding with her niece and nephew while helping me recover. Most surprisingly, Brittany from the hospital reached out and connected me with a support group for young widowed parents. Their first meeting was via Zoom, so I could participate from home, and for the first time since David died, I felt truly understood by people who had walked this path before me. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation deteriorated rapidly. They had indeed been living beyond their means, relying on my monthly contributions to maintain their lifestyle vacations, luxury purchases, and all. Ashley uncovered that they had taken out a second mortgage on their house a year ago to buy the boat, assuming I would continue subsidizing their primary mortgage indefinitely. "They've been lying to everyone," Ashley said, visibly shocked after helping them review their finances at their request. "They're not destitute, they're just overspent. They'd be fine if they sold the boat and the vacation timeshare." Their increasingly desperate voicemails and texts continued, but each day, their hold on me weakened. I was building something new from the ashes of their betrayal, a genuine support network based on mutual care, not obligation. Then, 1 month after my surgery, came the unexpected twist. My parents received a foreclosure notice. Ashley called to inform me, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "They're in complete panic mode," she explained. "The bank is giving them 60 days to catch up on payments, or they'll lose the house." "What about their retirement funds?" I asked, bouncing Lily on my knee while Cody napped. "Mostly depleted. They spent a chunk on that boat, then invested the rest in some scheme Dad's golf buddy recommended. They lost almost everything," Ashley sighed. "I'm not saying you should help them, Sarah. I just thought you should know." Later that evening, I received desperate texts from both parents, now abandoning all pretense of concern for my well-being and openly begging for money. My mother's message was particularly revealing. "We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would start sending money again after a week or two." Their assumption that my boundaries weren't real infuriated me. All those years of putting their needs before mine, of accepting their mistreatment, they had never respected me at all. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in unexpected ways. The support group had become a lifeline, connecting me with other parents facing similar challenges. Through them, I met Jennifer, a real estate agent whose husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier, leaving her with a 3-year-old son. She helped me consider options I hadn't thought possible, like selling my too-small apartment and using the equity to move to a more affordable neighborhood with better childcare options. I'd also started a small side business designing memorial websites, inspired by the one I'd created for David. Several members of my support group had commissioned sites, and word was spreading. For the first time since becoming a widow, I felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The contrast between my growth and my parents' collapse became even more apparent when they showed up unannounced at my apartment again, this time with a detailed spreadsheet of their debts. "We need $134,000 to catch up on the mortgage and avoid foreclosure," my father explained, his usual authoritative tone now tinged with desperation. I invited them in, not out of obligation, but because I was curious to hear their perspective now that they were truly facing consequences. "What about selling the boat?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit at my small dining table. "We'd take a loss," my father protested. "And the timeshare?" "We've tried, but the market is terrible," my mother added quickly. Besides, those are our retirement luxuries. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Luxuries you can't afford. We could afford them with your help, my father countered, his tone hardening. It's the least you could do after everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. The twins chose that moment to toddle into the room, Cody clutching his favorite truck and Lily babbling happily. My parents' expressions softened instantly. There are our precious babies, my mother cooed, reaching for Lily, who promptly hid behind my legs. They don't know you, I stated simply. You've seen them, 3 times in their lives? You chose not to be involved. That's not fair, my father protested. We're busy people. Too busy for your only grandchildren? Too busy to help your daughter through emergency surgery, but not too busy to ask for money? I observed. I think that says everything about your priorities. My mother's face crumpled, but whether it was from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell anymore. Without your help, we'll lose everything, she whispered, her voice trembling. I took a slow, steady breath. I lost my husband, I replied, keeping my tone even. My children lost their father. We survived. You'll survive too. 3 months after my surgery, my parents faced the inevitable. They had been forced to sell their house to avoid foreclosure. Ashley kept me updated on their situation, though I kept my distance. They had managed to find a modest condo, downsizing dramatically from their once pristine 4,000 square foot lakefront property. My father had reluctantly sold his boat at a loss, and they had finally offloaded their timeshare for a fraction of what they'd paid. They're actually blaming you for their financial problems in front of everyone, Ashley informed me during one of her weekly visits. It's bizarre to watch. They tell anyone who will listen that you abandoned them after promising lifelong support. Let them talk, I replied, surprisingly unbothered. The truth speaks for itself. And it did. My extended family had rallied around me after learning the full story. Even my father's sister, who had always taken his side in family disputes, called to express her support after hearing about their refusal to help during my surgery. Meanwhile, my own life had shifted dramatically for the better. Jennifer from my support group had helped me find and purchase a small 3-bedroom house in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. The mortgage payments were actually less than my old apartment rent had been, and the twins now had a backyard to play in for the first time in their lives. My side business designing memorial websites had grown enough that I could scale back on my graphic design clients and focus on work that felt meaningful. Tiffany still helped with childcare 3 days a week, but I'd adjusted my schedule to maximize time with Cody and Lily. Most importantly, I had found a community. Neighbors brought casseroles when we moved in, the support group organized playdates, and Ashley had become a genuine sister, not a competitor for our parents' affection. Even Brittany from the hospital occasionally stopped by with her children. I had lost my husband and cut ties with my parents, yet somehow I felt less alone than ever before. 6 months after my surgery, I received a letter, a real, handwritten letter from my mother. I almost threw it away, unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was something I had never seen before, a genuine apology. I've had time to reflect on my behavior, she wrote. Watching you build a life without our help has forced me to confront some painful truths about myself as a mother. I was jealous of your independence, your resilience. I resented that you didn't seem to need me the way I needed my own mother. But now I see that you did need me, just not in the ways I wanted to be needed. When you asked us to care for the twins during your surgery, you were reaching out and we failed you completely. I'm deeply sorry. The letter continued, detailing how they had completely overhauled their finances. My father had taken a part-time job at a local hardware store. They had sold most of their luxury items, living more modestly for the first time in decades. There was no request for money, no plea for forgiveness, just a simple desire for acknowledgement of her apology. I showed the letter to Ashley, who was skeptical. They've been talking about writing to you for weeks. Dad was against it at first, but I think he's starting to see things differently, especially after his heart scare last month. Heart scare? I asked, despite myself concerned. Just high blood pressure and chest pains, but it scared him. He's on medication now and actually following the doctor's orders, Ashley explained. I think facing mortality has humbled him a bit. I wasn't ready to respond to the letter right away. I needed time to process. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation tactic? Had they really changed, or were they just adapting their strategy? That night, I sat down with old family photos for the first time since cutting ties. Behind the smiles, I saw patterns I had been blind to before. My parents had always been performers, playing the role of perfect parents while serving their own needs first. A year after my surgery, I agreed to meet my parents at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my new home. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. My father seemed smaller somehow, his once confident posture replaced with a humbler demeanor. My mother's designer clothes had been traded for simple, practical attire. Ashley had taken the twins for the afternoon. I wasn't ready for a full family reunion just yet. We sat in awkward silence until my father did something I never expected. He cried. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice breaking, "and an even worse grandfather. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see it now how selfish we've been." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but gesturing toward it. "We've spent months in family therapy," she said. "It was Ashley's idea, and we resisted at first, but it's been transformative." I didn't rush to forgive them or make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I shared pictures of the twins and told them about our new life. They listened without interrupting, without making it about themselves, perhaps for the first time ever. As we parted, my father asked quietly, "Would it be possible, someday, to know our grandchildren?" I considered his question carefully before answering. That depends on your actions, not your words. If you're genuinely committed to change, we can start with short, supervised visits. But understand this. My children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother. Walking away from that meeting, I didn't feel the crushing weight of obligation or the burning resentment that had defined our relationship for so long. Instead, I felt something new. The calm assurance of a woman who knew her worth, who had created boundaries and would enforce them without apology. Whether my parents could truly change remained to be seen, but I had already transformed from a daughter desperate for approval to a mother fiercely protective, clear in my expectations and unafraid to set the terms. What do you do when the people you've spent your life trying to please are the same ones who've consistently failed you? When you've given everything money, time, even your heart, and they've still shown no regard for your needs? Sarah spent years sacrificing for her parents, hoping that one day they'd see her worth. Even after losing her husband, she continued to support them, believing family should be there for one another. But when she needed them most, when she was facing a life-threatening surgery, they couldn't even put down their concert tickets to help care for their grandchildren. That was the breaking point. In the midst of pain and fear, Sarah made a choice. She stopped giving. She stopped living in guilt and obligation. She sent the message to her parents that her children, her life, would no longer revolve around their expectations. And though the financial cost of cutting ties was huge, the emotional payoff was priceless. Now, Sarah is building a new life, one where she's respected, loved, and supported by those who truly care. Her parents, on the other hand, are learning the hard way that respect is earned, not expected. So, what do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where cutting ties was the only option? How would you have handled this? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.